Okay, we'd like to turn to the book of Ruth, chapter 2. Read verses 1 through 3, and then we'll read verses 15 through 19. Ruth chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field, and glean ears of corn after him, that is, after Boaz, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And her hap, or just so happened, she lighted on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. Verses 15 through verse 19. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out, and she had gleaned, and was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up, went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. Now, as we know, there are only two books in the Bible which bear the name or title, has a title, the name of a woman. There is Ruth, who of course was a Gentile, and there is Esther, who was a Jew. Ruth and Esther. And the theme of both of those books is God's providence, God's provision. What stands out in both of the books is the sovereignty of God, that God is faithful. God is faithful in loving, overseeing, and caring for His people. Coming to the book of Ruth, it only consists of 85 verses. Yet it is one of the most moving accounts in all the Word of God. Its riches are inexhaustible. Preach a long time from the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth probably covers a minimum of a period of 10 to 12 years, a minimum. Chapter 1, we know, covers a period of 10 years. We know that from chapter 1 and verse 4. They dwelt there about 10 years. Chapter 2 covers a period of several months. We read in chapter 1, verse 22, that it was the beginning of barley harvest. And in chapter 2, verse 23, we see it's the end of barley harvest. So a couple of months. In chapter 3, there is a day and there is a night. And chapter 4, there's a wedding and the birth of a son, which could have covered many, many years, but I don't believe it did. So the book of Ruth is a story of love, a story of devotion and redemption. It paints a picture of the redemption that we have in Christ. It tells of a foreign girl, Ruth. She comes out of paganism. She comes out of idolatry. She had lived in the land of Moab, and she comes to a personal knowledge of the God of Israel. We learn from chapter 1 and verse 1 that the events that occur in the book of Ruth was during the time of the judges. Chapter 1, verse 1, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So we know the time setting of the book of Ruth. The book, when the judges ruled, of course, overall was a time of spiritual declension, a time of national departure from God. I'm speaking overall. A time of great waywardness, a time of permissiveness. It was a period of time that was marked by rebellion and immorality. And it was during this time, chapter 1, verse 1, that there was a famine in the land. So now we see the circumstances. And we are then introduced to a Jewish family that lived in Canaan in the town of Bethlehem, Judah, which meant the house of bread. It is God's place for God's people. And this family, this Jewish family, not because they had to, because even though it was a time of famine, we read in chapter 1, verse 21, they went out full. So it wasn't like they were starving. They went out full. And this Jewish family moves to Moab, the land of the enemies of God. This family of Elimelech, Naomi, their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And we read that they went to sojourn in the country of Moab. And in verse 2, they continued there. And as we've already seen, they continued there for 10 years. Elimelech, the husband, the father, he would die in Moab. There's a lesson there for the child of God. You don't want to die in Moab. And the two sons would marry Moabitish women, Orpah and Ruth. And in the meantime, the sons, Chilion and Mahlon, they too would die in Moab. Not in the house of bread, Bethlehem, Judah, but in Moab. So now Naomi is left with her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. So in the first 5 verses of the book of Ruth, a tale of woe is told. In 5 verses, you read of a famine, 3 deaths, and we are left with 3 widows that are left behind to mourn and find a way to live, which in those times, if you were a widow, wasn't like today. So there are 3 widows, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. And by the gracious providence of God, chapter 1, verse 6, Naomi heard that in the country, she heard while she was in the country of Moab, how that the Lord had visited his people, giving them bread. Oh, imagine that. Upon hearing such, Naomi, in verse 7, decides to return to the land of Judah. And Orpah and Ruth, her daughter-in-laws, they start to follow her. Naomi tries to talk both of them into staying with their families in Moab, in their homeland. Her basis is she's assuring them that she has nothing for them. There's nothing I can give you. I have no more sons. Orpah, upon Naomi's convincing, returns. But Ruth is committed to following Naomi to Bethlehem, Judah. And she does. And we read in verse 19, chapter 1, so they too, that is Ruth and Naomi, went until they came to Bethlehem. And in verse 22 we read, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law. So they're together. Coming to chapter 2, from chapter 2 on, the two main characters of the book are now Ruth, and she's a type of the Lord's church. And there is Boaz, a type of Christ. It is from chapter 2 on that Ruth's life is shaped by Boaz. And again, this is in the distressing context of the period of the Judges. Ruth is blessed with possibilities and privilege and opportunity. It's all because of Boaz. So in chapter 2, we see Ruth. She's a stranger in the land. And she's gleaning in the field of Boaz. And as such, she is an example of abundant living in the midst of distress. Our subject is the daily gathering of what God has for us. Ruth stands in sharp contrast to the background of her own Moabite ancestry. She overcomes all of this. So the first thing we want to consider is, in the midst of the distress of the times, there was Boaz. We read in chapter 2 and verse 1 that Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, that is, on her husband's side. The kinsman in the Old Testament, of course, was a male relative who had the privilege, if you want to look at it that way, or the responsibility to act on behalf of a relative who was in trouble or danger or need. And Naomi was blessed to have a kinsman on her husband's side. And we're told that his name was Boaz. That name means in him is strength. Great possibilities existed because of Boaz. So let's look at the person of Boaz. In Ruth 2, verse 1, our attention, of course, is drawn to him. And we're told that he was a mighty man. That is, he was a very influential man. Jesus Christ is our Boaz. We are told also that he was a man of wealth. He was a man of prosperity. He was a man that had great substance, had many resources, a man of abundance. Jesus Christ is our Boaz. We read in Ephesians 3, verse 8, of the unsearchable riches of Christ. Colossians 1, verse 19, for it pleased the Father in him, that is Christ, should all fullness dwell. In Jesus Christ there is treasure. In Jesus Christ there are resources. In Jesus Christ there's abundance. There's plenty. In a world that is a wasteland, filled with bareness and emptiness and desolation, there is such a thing as all fullness. And it is in Jesus Christ. That is, all fullness, there's more than enough for every season. Doesn't matter the season, doesn't matter the circumstance. There's more than enough in Christ. Jesus Christ is our Boaz. And just as there was something very special for Ruth in Boaz, the Lord has something very, very special for us in Christ. The next thing we're told is that Boaz had a field. We read in verse 3 those words, a part of the field belonging unto Boaz. He was the owner. In other words, there was a place where you would expect to find Boaz. There was a place where you would probably meet Boaz. Notice verse 4 of Ruth 2. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers. Imagine that. Boaz showing up in his field. You would expect that. So in that field, this field is a very special place because it belongs to Boaz. And in this field, there was the presence of Boaz. And here we are, like Ruth, living in a time of trial, time of adversity. But there are places where you will meet Boaz. We ought to long to get to those places. There are places where you are likely to find Boaz. In this field, and because of Boaz, there was an opportunity for Ruth to glean ears of corn. Notice verse 3. It says that she went and gleaned in the field belonging to Boaz. She went and gleaned in the field belonging to Boaz. To glean is to gather. It's to obtain, to get. So she's in the field of Boaz, and she's gone there with a specific purpose. Her purpose is to gather. Her purpose is to obtain, to get from the field of Boaz. Make it your purpose every single day to glean what the Lord has for you. Make that your purpose every day. Again, to glean grain or other produce in those days was a part of the Mosaic system. The harvesters, the reapers, would walk through the fields, cutting the stalks, binding them into sheaves, and the poor and the strangers were allowed to walk behind these reapers and gather the stalks that they would drop along the way that would be lying there on the ground. That was part of the Mosaic system of taking care of the poor and the strangers. Ruth, she's poor, she's a stranger, living in the distressing days of the judges, but there was a field of opportunity and blessing. So it is today. No matter what your circumstances may be, there is a field, an opportunity, a place of opportunity and blessing. It was in that field that Boaz, who had everything Ruth would ever need, took very special notice and interest in Ruth. Notice verse 5. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this? Boaz immediately takes interest in Ruth. She's a poor woman, a stranger, a foreigner. And it's really amazing that Boaz would be interested in a poor, penniless, despised, weak, helpless stranger such as Ruth. This interest in Ruth would provide her with special opportunities. We've already said our Boaz is Jesus Christ. And he has a special interest in us. And that provides us with amazing opportunities. He's taken notice, not because of anything in us, but in spite of ourselves. He's taken notice of us. And that provides us with amazing opportunities. Notice verse 8. Then said Boaz unto Ruth. So he's drawn close to her. And he is initiating a conversation. He's talking to her. So Boaz draws nigh unto Ruth. He speaks personally to her, but not as a stranger. Notice, hearest thou not my daughter? He calls her his daughter. Verse 8, Boaz instructs Ruth. He says to her, my daughter, go not to glean in another field. There are many fields, a lot of fields, and you can glean in any one of them. But notice what he says. But abide here. Ruth, there's no need for you to go to any other field. You just stay in this field. There's no need for you to go anywhere else in search of what you need. It's all right here. And here we are, like Ruth, living in a time of difficulty. But Boaz has a field, a place where you will find what you need. A place where our Boaz is. And we can abide there. We can stay there. It was in that field, that special place, that Boaz assured Ruth of special protection and provision. Notice verse 9. Let thine eyes be in the field, that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go into the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn. So he assures her that she would be protected and well provided for in that field. He gives her assurance. And because Jesus Christ is our Boaz, we have assurance. But notice something else in verse 14. She receives a special invitation from Boaz. Come thou hither. And our Boaz says to us, come, come. Also, as in the field of Boaz, that Boaz provided a special time of refreshment and fellowship for her. Verse 14 again, he provides a table for her. And every day, our Boaz provides a table for us every day. You may not sit at that table, but every day it's there. How foolish we are if we don't sit at that table. Ruth had been gleaning. Verse 7, she had continued even from the morning until now. So she's been gleaning for several hours. And then Boaz says to her, come and eat with us. And we read in verse 15, after she had partaken of that table, and when she was risen up from the table to glean, where did she get the strength to glean some more? At the table with Boaz. You need strength? Sit at the table with Boaz. You'll find the strength you need to go on. It was also in this field that Boaz had made special provision specifically for Ruth. Notice verse 15 and verse 16. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. Don't get in her way. Don't get in her way. And let fall also some handfuls of purpose for her. He says, what I want you to do is I want you to drop on purpose some stalks for her. Just drop them on purpose so that she can glean. Handfuls of purpose for her. For her. For no one else. Drop for her. So what Boaz is telling his reapers is, I want you to purposely drop what she needs. I want you to purposely drop that which will benefit her. That which will be for her good, that which will profit her, that which she can feed upon. He is saying, let all these things fall where she is, so she can reach down and glean them. Everything that comes to pass in our lives, God has something for us. And He drops what He has on purpose for us to gather. Everything that comes to pass in our lives, God takes notice of us, makes sure that there are some things dropped on purpose from His own hand for us to glean. Dropped on purpose, with a purpose, from the very hand of God are precious things. Things that will greatly help you, things that will encourage you, things that will strengthen and comfort you, things that will suffice you, things that will prepare you, things that will instruct you, things that will assure you, things that will reassure you, things that will draw us and things that will bless us. And they are dropped on purpose, with a purpose, specifically for you and I to glean, for you and I to obtain, for you and I to get, for you and I to take and to gather. And it is our privilege as God's people to do this. These handfuls of purpose speak of abundance. They speak of personal love. They speak of personal interest that God has for us. Again, handfuls on purpose for her. What an opportunity Ruth now has. And notice the reason that they were to drop them, that she may glean them. That she may glean them. The Lord takes notice and makes sure that there are some things dropped on purpose that we can glean. I believe that's true every day. God on purpose and with a purpose drops right in front of us what we need. But we can get so caught up in our circumstances, so caught up in whatever, that we don't even see what God has dropped on purpose right for us. And we just trample upon it. There is also, we see there's Boaz. There's also Ruth. She's a picture of you and I. Ruth gleaned in abundance. We read in verse 7, so she gleaned. So she gleaned. Ruth had the opportunity to glean. So do we. So she gleaned. She had the opportunity to glean in the fields of Boaz. So she gleaned. Oh, may that be us. So she gleaned. She would stoop and gather straw by straw. They didn't just turn around and hand her the stalks. They dropped them on purpose. And then she had to go along and stoop, gather the stalk, stoop, gather the next one. And God doesn't just hand us what He has for us every day, but He drops it on purpose, right where we are. And then it's our responsibility to stoop and to glean. Well, I'm not going to stoop for anybody or anything. Well, you're not going to glean either. Ruth was a very successful gleaner. We read in verse 17 that what she had was about an ephah of barley, which is approximately 30 pounds. That's a lot of stalk. From Exodus 16, verse 36, an ephah was 10 omers. And in Exodus 16, verse 16, an omer was manna adequate for the daily needs of one individual. So what's this saying? She gathered 10 times the adequate daily needs of an individual. 10 times what she needed. We read verse 18, and she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. She had enough to meet her own requirements, and she had enough to more than meet her mother-in-law's requirements as well. In other words, she gleaned enough that she could be a blessing to someone else. We can glean every day what the Lord has for us. And we can glean so much that we can be a blessing to someone else who didn't glean. Oh, may that be us. So she was a very successful gleaner. So let's consider what led to Ruth being a successful gleaner. First of all, she had left paganism and idolatry. In order for you and I to glean what the Lord has for us, you may have to leave some things. You may have to leave some people. You may have to leave a place. But you're going to have to leave somewhere to go glean. We see also that she was surrendered. She was committed and dedicated to the Lord. Back in chapter 1, verses 16 through 18, if we turn there. Again, Naomi is trying to talk Orpah and Ruth into staying in Moab. In Ruth 1, 16 through 18, this was part of Sharon's vows for our wedding. And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. Wherever you go, I'm going. And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." And then Naomi, looking at Ruth, she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her. So she left speaking to her. Ruth had made a declaration to Naomi. And it is a picture. She is saying, I am going to follow you at all cost. I'm going to follow God at all cost. She makes total commitment. Total commitment. Total commitment. Even if it meant death. She commits with no limits. She was determined. She was committed. She was focused. Naomi saw that she was steadfastly minded to go all the way. Oh, how we need a people to be steadfastly minded to go all the way, not just part of the way, but all the way. If you're going to glean like Ruth, there must be a daily commitment, a daily surrender to the Lord. I'm going to go all the way with Him. So her success in gleaning has much to do with her commitment. Another thing is she realized that there was gleaning to be done. I'm afraid there's a lot of God's people who do not even realize the gleaning that can be done. You hear her say in verse 2 to Naomi, "Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn." They had nothing. They had nothing. So she turns to her mother-in-law and she says, "Let me go into the fields and glean." And we see in verse 7 that she went to one of the reapers and said, "I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." She's walking along, she comes to the field. The field just so happened to belong to Boaz. And she says to one of the reapers, "Would you please let me glean in this field?" That ought to be our daily prayer. Lord, allow me to glean today. Lord, I know you have something for me. You have handfuls of purpose for me. Lord, allow me and enable me to glean this day. That ought to be our desire. She realized that there was corn out there to be gleaned, and she wanted it. Do you realize today that God every single day drops on purpose that which will benefit you? Do you want it? Do you want it? We need to honestly answer that question. Do I want what God has for me today? Oh, yeah, I want it. Huh? Stop. Think about this. If you get it, it may change your whole day. Do you want it? Well, I've got plans today. Okay. Do you want it? What the Lord drops for you may change your life. Well, we need to honestly answer that question. Do I want? It's a fact. God is going to drop for me today what I need. The question is, not if the Lord is going to drop it. He's going to. He said He would. But do I want it? Do I want? Because gathering what the Lord wants for me may change my plans. And let's be honest. A lot of times people don't want their plans changed. So do I really want what God has for me? So it has to be that desire. And then there has to be a willingness to do whatever is necessary to obtain it. If I'm going to obtain it, then I have to stoop and I walk a little further, stoop again, walk a little further, stoop again. It's going to get tiring. Well, my back's hurting a little bit today. So, are you willing? Are you willing to stoop for what God has for you today? Do you want it? And if you want it bad enough, guess what? You're willing. You're willing. So our degree of willingness shows how much we want it. Shows our level of desire. Every day, God has specifically for me handfuls of that which will be spiritually beneficial to my soul. And I must be willing to glean. I must want what He has for me. Great possibilities exist because of Boaz, because of Christ. She also realized her need of grace, and she desired such. Again in verse 2, she said to Naomi, let me go into the fields. And also in verse 13, then she said, let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like unto one of thine handmaidens. She realizes that she's an object of God's grace. She also put herself in a position to glean. Verse 3, and she went and came and gleaned in the field. You know there's gleaning to be done in the field. You say, well, I want to glean. But you remain where you are and you never go to the field. Oh, I want to. You got to believe I want to. Well, why would I believe that? You haven't even gone to the place where you can glean. So in order to glean, you have to put yourself in a position to glean. Here's what happens with many. They get up in the morning, get a cup of coffee, they sit in front of the TV, and they watch the news. Where are they gleaning to start their day? With the news. Then they're upset for most of the day. And most of the day, that's their focus. That's their conversation. That's where they've gleaned. All along, the Lord has fields to glean in, but they haven't even put themselves in a position to glean over there. We need to put ourselves in a position to glean. Next, she paid attention and was aware of what was being dropped in her path. God is still dropping handfuls of purpose, leaving them in our path, that we may glean them. But many are oblivious and blind to the handfuls of purpose. They've started their day by watching the news, listening to the news, reading the news, whatever. They're upset. That's become their focus. And they're just walking right past what God has dropped for them that day. Just walking right past. They're oblivious to it. Many have their eyes upon and are so busy with other things that they have no awareness or consciousness of God's handfuls of purpose dropped right in front of them. And what they do is they end up trampling over them, what is dropped in their path. She remained in the field of Boaz. She put herself in a position to glean, and she remained in the field of Boaz. In verse 8, then said Boaz unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from thence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Keep your eyes on this field, Boaz is saying. Keep your eyes on this field. Make sure you keep your eyes on the right thing. Because where your eyes are is where you're going to glean. It's no wonder that so many of God's people are a mess. I mean, they don't have an ounce of sense. They're a mess. Because they spend weeks and months and years gleaning in the wrong fields. gleaning in the fields of CNN, gleaning in the fields of Fox News, gleaning in the fields of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You're gleaning in the wrong place. Glean in the fields of Boaz. So she continued in the field of Boaz. She had a spirit of worship. Verse 10, then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldst take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? You want to glean? Maintain a spirit of worship. And you entangle yourselves with the affairs of this life, you can't worship. You have to maintain a spirit of worship if you want to glean. She also had special communion with Boaz. We've already seen that Boaz invites her to come and sit at his table. And in verse 14, at that table, and Boaz said unto her, At mealtime come thou thither and eat of the bread. Dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he, Boaz, reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. And then we see, and when she was risen up to glean. She maintained communion with Boaz. You want to be a successful gleaner? Maintain communion with Jesus Christ. She was also willing to do whatever was necessary to glean. We read in verse 7 that she came and hath continued even from the morning till now. There's a tone of amazement in those words from the reapers. She endured toil. She endured fatigue. A lot of God's people can't endure anything. Can't endure the slightest inconvenience. You got to be able to endure. You got to be able to persevere. And that comes from communion with Boaz. So she continues over and over to stoop for each ear. She continued to gather ear by ear, keeping in her hand what she had gleaned. And this would not be no easy task. I mean, she's gleaned nearly 30 pounds. And she's holding on and just continuing. She just keeps on going, willing to stoop. How far are you willing to stoop for what the Lord has for you? Well, if He doesn't drop it in my lap, then I'm not going to do anything. That's about how it is today. And goes even further than that. If He doesn't put it in my mouth and move my jaws and enable me to chew it, I'm not doing it. How far are you willing to stoop? How many times are you willing to stoop to gather what God has for us? So, may we view each day as a gleaning day. Every day is a gleaning day. But we need to view each day as a gleaning day. May we view each circumstance. May we view each opportunity. May we view each circumstance as an opportunity to glean. To glean handfuls of purpose. Perhaps it's a circumstance that you would not have chosen. Perhaps it's a circumstance that you do not welcome in your life. But I'm telling you, in that circumstance, God has dropped something on purpose for you. Glean. Glean. Whatever it might be. May we always be looking for what God has dropped in our path. May we always be willing to stoop to obtain what God has dropped in our behalf. May we be willing to glean straw by straw. Oh, I want to just glean all the 30 pounds at once. No, it's straw by straw. That's how Ruth gleaned, straw by straw. Need to be willing. to do that, and you pick up that straw. Just one straw. And it doesn't appear to be much, but you hold on to it, and then you pick up the next straw. Now I've got 2 straws. Don't drop them. Hold on to whatever it is that you've gleaned. That's how you become a successful gleaner. Hold on to what you glean. You don't drop this to get something else. You don't get anywhere that way. You don't get 30 pounds that way. You get 1 straw that way. Hold on. God has handfuls of purpose. He's dropped right where you are. Stoop down, pick it up, hold on to it. Don't let go. And then stoop down and get the next one. That's what we see here in Ruth. She was a successful gleaner. And she became a blessing and an encouragement to others. Naomi asked her in verse 19, "Where hast thou gleaned today?" She saw this abundance and she said, "Ruth, where have you gleaned today? Where wroughtest thou?" That's a good question. 2 questions. Where have we gleaned today? Every one of us gleaned somewhere every single day. Where have you gleaned today? Where wrougest thou? Where did you labor today? We need to ask ourselves that question. And then hear what Ruth said. She said, "The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz." The man's name, notice what it says, "with whom I have wrought today is Boaz." What is she saying? She's saying, Naomi, I spent the day with Boaz. I spent the day with Boaz. What a wonderful way to spend the day. You can't do better than that. I spent the day with Boaz. We all spend the day with somebody. It may not be a literal person. We spend the day with something. It could be our thoughts. There are a lot of people that do that. They just sit in a room and think all day. They spent the day with their thoughts. Round and round and round they go. You won't glean much that way. But hear Ruth say, I spent the day with Boaz. And that will lead to an abundance from him. May we determine, and by God's help, spend each day with Boaz. Spend each day with our Boaz, Jesus Christ. And if we do that, you'll be amazed at how much you can glean in a day. Oh, just one straw at a time, but you glean all day long, you're going to have a lot of straws. So much so, you not only have enough for you, you have enough to help someone else as well. Isn't that better? Isn't it better to live life that way, to glean in the field of Jesus Christ every day, straw by straw by straw? Suffice ourselves and be able to give to someone else. Isn't that better than gleaning in the wrong fields and giving people the wrong things? And that's what happens. People glean in the fields of poison and then they give their poison over to someone else, and on and on and on it goes. May we not be that person, but may we be Ruth, gleaning in the fields of Boaz. And we come and we see somebody in need and we're able to help them with what we have gleaned. Brother Dave, if you would come and lead us in a verse of song.